How's it going everyone, RivalRyyyy here and welcome back to the channel. Now we previously covered some of the old Pokemon games on old consoles such as the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, so make sure to check out those videos, but today we're going to move on to Pokemon's transition to a main series console. It's probably safe to say that the Nintendo Switch has been a bit of a mixed bag for the Pokemon franchise. We've had some controversial decisions that have infuriated some fans, complete review annihilation, and innovative ideas all rolled into one. I think most would agree it hasn't necessarily been a smooth transition in terms of quality, though sales wise it definitely looks the case. So let's dive into Pokemon on the Nintendo Switch and rank the games available to see which one's the best. Now before we start, it's important to put a disclaimer. It goes without saying this is my own opinion. If you disagree, that's completely fine. Make sure to comment down below your favourite Pokemon game on the Nintendo Switch. Pokemon Legends ZA is not going to be included in this list as it's not out at the time of me making this video, though I hope it slots in at number 1 because I always want the next game to be the best one released. And make sure to like this video, it really helps out the channel. There are a total of 13 games on the Nintendo Switch right now, but that doesn't include the games that are included on the Nintendo Switch expansion pack. So Pokemon the Trading Card Game, Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, Pokemon Snap, and Pokemon Puzzle League will not be ranked in this video. Plus, it would be unfair anyways because Pokemon Puzzle League would go straight to the top and nothing else would have a chance. Number 13, Pokemon Home. I kind of struggle to place Pokemon Home on this list as a game per se. I would probably classify this as a functional add-on instead. Putting it at 13 implies it's the worst of everything on the Nintendo Switch, so I was originally going to put a question mark ranking this, because I actually think it's one of the best things we've got access to in the franchise, even if some of its best functions are behind a paywall. Pokemon Home is the storage place for Pokemon on the Switch, and it allows us to access all our Pokemon in one place. When I was younger back on the DS, I would rarely restart games. This is simply down to the fact I had rare Pokemon on my cartridge like Darkrai, which you could only get through events, and if I restarted I would have lost it. Back in the early to late 2000s, aka the Dark Age, events weren't Wi-Fi accessible, so you'd have no choice to go down to a video game store to get a Pokemon, which is absolutely crazy when you consider what's at our disposal nowadays. Well, with Pokemon Home you can transfer your Pokemon to boxes and then restart your games with no issues or worries. There are some useful features on Pokemon Home as well, including the ability to transfer points you've earned from Pokemon Home to LP points on Scarlet and Violet. The issues that Pokemon Home has is more to do with things beyond its control, such as a severely long process in transferring all Pokemon across games, especially with Pokemon Bank no longer being purchasable. But that's more of an issue to do with the franchise than Pokemon Home itself. The solution would naturally be to add the games to the Switch and somehow figure out a way to transfer Pokemon across, which I imagine would be very difficult technically. Probably part of the reason why it's not been done yet. The only reason it's bottom of this list is because I would technically class it as a function than a game. A good one, of course. I'm sure everybody would prefer a fully free version because of course we would, but in terms of actually being a game itself, I don't really think it is one. Still, I think it's a good function and a great addition to the franchise. Number 12, Pokemon Cafe Remix. Originally launched as Pokemon Cafe Mix before it had some updates, the game is a nice puzzle game that essentially combines cafe management with some engaging puzzle mechanics. You take the role of an owner who teams up with Pokemon in order to serve dishes to customers, with the core gameplay being completing puzzles to prepare food and drinks. You would essentially connect icons representing Pokemon to clear the board and attempt to achieve a specific objective with a limited number of moves. Similar to Candy Crush in a way. Each Pokemon has unique abilities that can help you clear a board in a different way, which adds different strategy to the gameplay. The game's puzzles are designed to be quite accessible, making it easy for newcomers to pick up, with one of the major strengths the game has featuring frequent updates and events, which introduces new Pokemon, themed challenges and limited time rewards. The regular updates can encourage players to return to the game regularly, and it also allows players to join teams and collaborate on goals. One of the major issues it has, however, is that while the puzzles are fun, it can easily become repetitive over time, especially for players who complete them very quickly. Now, that word repetitive is actually going to get repetitive in this video. I might have to start replacing it with different words instead. While the repetitive nature of it can make it kind of boring sometimes, the most important thing to remember is that it's a free-to-play model. Well, for the most part. There is paywalls and microtransactions that can hinder progression, which is quite common in these games. I've only ever really played Candy Crush a little bit in my life, but I got bombarded with microtransactions for that. Still, the fact that on a general basis it's free to play, and the art style is actually very cute, definitely provides a bit of charm to this game. It doesn't have the depth of some traditional Pokemon games that are available, so it's quite low down on the list, but it's a nice, easy and accessible puzzle game that you should definitely try out sometime. At a minimum, just check it out to see how cute the Pokemon are. Number 11, Pokemon Quest. Pokemon Quest is a unique addition to the Pokemon franchise that breaks away from the traditional RPG style style that the fans are used to. Released initially on a Nintendo Switch, though it's now made its way to mobile devices, the game's in a voxel art style, which is quite a distinctive look. In fact, I'm sure there's a particular game that you see when you see Pokemon Quest, because I certainly did. As you explore the world, you gather ingredients to cook meals to attract various Pokemon to join your team. Pokemon Quest features some simplified game mechanics. Players control a team of Pokemon that automatically battle with wild creatures, with you gaining the ability to press certain moves, such as the Thunderbolt, to do a little bit more damage. This changes that traditional turn-based battle to a more casual experience. Players can customize their Pokemon with different power stones to enhance their abilities, allowing for some minor strategic planning of team competition. Again, nice and simple, but as I said before with a particular word, it can get quite repetitive. Hold on, I'm searching for different words I can use instead of repetitive. Monotonous, tedious, mundane, tiresome, dreary, soul-destroying, mind-numbing, none of these words. Wait, what's that one? Humdrum. Okay, the game's humdrum. I'm never going to use that word ever again in my life. I'm going to go back to repetitive now. Also, progression can feel a bit slow in this game, with certain Pokemon only becoming available after a considerable amount of grinding and resource gathering. I'd say the major draws of Pokemon Quest is that it's a very easy game to pick up, with some familiar Minecraft-like graphics, and most importantly, it's free, and we can't complain at that. It's simple, light-hearted, and not really offensive. I can't put it any higher on the list, but it doesn't need to go any higher either. It knows exactly what it is. Number 10, New Pokemon Snap. Now I did say earlier that Pokemon Snap was not going to be in this video, and that's because New Pokemon Snap was released as a direct nod to the original game from the Nintendo 64. It took a concept for a game that people quite liked, and made it a nostalgia-filled experience while giving it modern upgrades that make it feel fresh and visually stunning. The core gameplay remains the same as the previous Pokemon Snap, as you try to take photos of Pokemon and try to score some high points. I think what New Pokemon Snap does very well is that it captures the magic of the Pokemon world. The environments are quite vibrant and varied, and the games are always quite fun to see if you could get a particular Pokemon to appear. You know, if you threw something like an Electrode in the original, it would explode and give you a really good photo. The photo mechanics are very easy to grasp, again like the original, and it encourages you to replay levels to uncover new behaviours or rarer Pokemon. The only reason it's not higher on this list is because it is plain and simply a photography game. It's fun and relaxing, but it doesn't offer the depth or variety of gameplay that some of the high-ranked Pokemon games on this list do. And this is a personal frustration I have with the game, but the price point on a Nintendo eShop is a bit ridiculous in my opinion. It is nowhere near that value in terms of price. I know you can get it cheaper offline, and online games tend to be more expensive, but while it's fun and captures some good things about the Pokemon world, it is essentially taking pictures. So why is it that high of a price? The most important thing about New Pokemon Snap is it is a wonderful tribute to the original, which was quite a unique take on the Pokemon world when it originally came out. Just make sure to get it a little bit cheaper if you decide to buy it. Number 9, Pokemon Unite. Pokemon Unite is Pokemon's entry into the MOBA genre, which is naturally dominated by League of Legends. It stays true to the basic principles of a MOBA, teams of players competing to control areas and defeat opponents and earn points. It brings its own unique Pokemon twist to the mix. Instead of focusing on destroying a central base or towers, Pokemon Unite introduces goal scoring systems, where players score points by defeating wild Pokemon and then delivering these points to designated zones. The most important thing that Pokemon Unite does is that it makes a MOBA genre more accessible. It's been a long time since I played League, and I mean a very long time. Like FIFA, I've discarded that away, never to go back. But I don't feel like I could pick up those games nowadays anyways. I'm so far removed from the metas, I find it very difficult to keep up. But because Pokemon Unite simplifies the core mechanics, I think it makes it easier for any newcomers and people returning to pick it up again. The games are much more shorter as well, around 10 minutes, which definitely makes the game feel a bit more fast paced. Again, I really struggle for time, so playing like League of Legends with a game that could go on for a significant period would definitely not suit me anymore. With their unique abilities and roles like attacker, defender and support, it fits well into the MOBA framework. That being said, because it's very easily accessible, if you're a hardcore MOBA player, I don't think this is something you'd be looking for, because it's much more simplified. After all, it's Pokemon, so it's a kids game and kids need to access it, so it may be too easy for some people. On our list, Pokemon Unite ranks lower because it is a MOBA, and that's not to criticize them. I just don't necessarily think MOBAs are for everybody. The genre is very polarizing, and as somebody who's now removed from playing them, I definitely see why. Still, Pokemon Unite makes it more accessible than most others, so it's a solid addition to the franchise, even if it doesn't have the broad appeal of other Pokemon titles. Also, important to note, Pokemon Unite is actually shutting down in a few countries in Europe, likely due to the restrictions put in place around the loot boxes controversy, especially when you consider Pokemon is traditionally aimed at a younger audience. So if you're from those countries or any other country that's looking to pursue these rules, bear in mind at some point this game could run into some issues. Number 8, Detective Pikachu returns. So I'm going to say this straight out, detective games are some of my favourite games around. I don't know what it is about them, maybe the mystery and thought put in behind the twists, as you discover who the main villain is. It's the main reason I absolutely love the Ace Attorney franchise. The love it's been getting in terms of remasters has been absolutely fantastic, and long may it continue. Now, Detective Pikachu serves as Pokemon's take on the mystery solving genre, hence it has drawn comparisons to Ace Attorney. The spin-off series brings a detective twist to the Pokemon world, with a bit more of a light-hearted storytelling with familiar characters. The original Detective Pikachu game was well received, even inspiring a full-length movie, so naturally it was a prime candidate to get a sequel game. The game itself is designed with a younger audience in mind, which is definitely reflected in how simple the puzzles in the game can be. While it doesn't present the same amount of challenge as a more complex detective game, the puzzles are still enjoyable, especially for a fan of the Pokemon franchise. The fact its difficulty is balanced out with some charm and humour makes Detective Pikachu Returns a fun game to play, even if the gameplay isn't overly demanding. One major issue that it has, which definitely works against it in this list, is how short the game is, so it's not necessarily content rich. It still offers a fun and engaging experience for players, especially if you appreciate Pokemon Universe's lighter side. It's probably just not worth the price it is because of how short the game is. Number 7, Pokken Tournament DX. Like Detective Pikachu being Pokemon's answer to detective genre games, Pokken Tournament DX serves as Pokemon's answer to the fighting game genre, drawing parallels to games like Tekken. And trust me, I could sit here and talk about Tekken all day. I'm going to hold off on doing so because I'm doing a Pokemon video, but I absolutely love the franchise, so a Pokemon game that's similar to it is perfect for me. Now, Pokken Tournament DX is an enhanced port of the Wii U version that allows players to engage in a fast-paced one-on-one battle using iconic Pokemon. It essentially merges the familiar mechanics of a traditional fighting game with unique Pokemon movesets and abilities. The battle combat is very fluid and allows players to switch between a field phase and a duel phase, creating dynamic battles that require strategy. The game has a pretty decent roster as well, though of course it naturally hits some of the fan favourites like Charizard and Lucario, with the inclusion of support Pokemon as well. Again, if you're not used to fighting games, that word repetitive comes around, and I also think single player content lacks a bit of depth. The story mode is also relatively short and doesn't offer much character development. Still, I think it's a great attempt by Pokemon to expand the franchise into more genres. On this list alone, we have both a fighting game and a detective game, and I think it's fun to see Pokemon in different contexts. I think Pokken Tournament is a solid fighting game, but unfortunately it falls down on this list a little due to the depth and variety offered in other titles. The game is enjoyable, especially for those who like a fast-paced combat, but if you don't like to repetitively play fighting games, it might not be for you. Personally, I'm a Tekken addict, so it makes no difference to me, but it was definitely a great addition to the Switch. Number 6, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Okay, so here is where the controversy begins. There are two sets of games in particular that no matter where I place them on this list, it's going to be controversial. The other is still to come, of course, but I honestly think no matter where I put it, you're probably going to think I'm wrong. Which is fair, of course, this is an open space, guys. Make sure to comment it down below and also like the video. But unfortunately, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl is ended up 6th on my list. When taking in all the factors, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl falls to this point due to the missed opportunity, more than any functionality issues. I have been a big critic of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl in the past, and for me personally, this has probably been the most frustrated I've ever been within the franchise, and I have been here a long time. The games honestly feel like an open net missed in football. Generation 4 especially, Platinum is a great generation. The original Diamond and Pearl had their issues, of course. They could be incredibly slow, especially when HP was being drained, but I would say overall they're great entries into the series. The major issue the Gen 4 remakes have compared to the previous 3 is not the art style, which to be honest I'm largely unfazed by. It was a design choice, one that's not worked out, but not every design choice ever works out anyways. But the major issue is that it can't be considered the best game of Generation 4. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green you could argue is the best Generation 1 game. Heart Gold and Soul Silver you can argue is the best game in Generation 2, and even Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire could potentially be considered the best Generation 3 game, even when its competition is Pokemon Emerald. Plain and simply, Pokemon Platinum is still the best way to play Generation 4, and I don't think Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl can be considered for that. The changes the other remakes gave to their respective games could give them an argument for being the best of their generation. Yes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did not have the Battle Frontier from Emerald, but it did have the Delta episode, which allowed us to smash through a Meteorite and Mega Ray Quasar in order to get Deoxys. The alternate additions that are added to those games allow it to be argued as the best one of that generation. It just then comes down to preference. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl does change some things, including the health bar not taking 10 years anymore, more accessible legendaries, and technically solving the issue of no fire types as there was only 2 in the original, which is crazy considering they literally introduced a fire type that generation, but didn't include them in the national dex. Something it keeps, by the way, you can just get them anyways in the underground. But it doesn't add enough to justify being classed as the best way to play a generation, and that for me is its major downfall. Not the art style, not the gameplay, just the fact it was supposed to improve and make a generation better, but I don't think it does enough to do so. It is still Generation 4, however, which is a good generation, so it's earned its place at number 6 on this list. It just doesn't hit the heights it should, unfortunately. Number 5, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So I'm going to go on record to say Scarlet and Violet are not the worst games ever made. I think as a fan base, we just have a habit of saying the most recent game release is the worst in the series. It has happened with all of them. Black and White was ripped for not having old Pokemon in the original region. X and Y was too easy. Sun and Moon had something different from gyms. Sword and Shield had Exit. I guarantee you now out there, some people now say Generation 6 is the best, or Generation 7 is the best, or 5 or 4, even though at some point in time people have criticised those particular generations. The reason why Pokemon Scarlet and Violet gets hit more, however, is that its major issues are the bugs and performance problems. I think that cycle will continue when Generation 10 comes out, but it's very easy to overlook the good things that Scarlet and Violet did. It introduced a more open world element to the Pokemon series, something that I feel is the right option moving forward, because we've always had a very rigid ability in terms of exploration, barring a few slightly different routes you could take, including different gyms in Generation 1, or doing gyms 3 and 4 in different orders in Gen 4. Is it fully actualized? Maybe not, but it's a step in the right direction for the franchise. I quite like the DLCs as well, as they take the place of the third games that we used to get, alongside a great collection of new Pokemon, classifying the ability to get your HMs, the gym challenge, and evil team as different plot points that all eventually have to be completed in order to get to the final showdown in Area 0. While I think it certainly gets beat up a bit more than it should, I don't want to excuse the problems either. Naturally, the most recent game is usually always hated more, because that's just how Pokemon has always been. But that doesn't excuse the performance and graphics either. Even with the updates and DLC, some of the issues still exist, which I simply don't think is acceptable, and because of that, it's entered at number 5 on this list. It's definitely a mixed bag. It's not 3.4 user rating bad, but it definitely has its shortcomings that are incredibly noticeable, and that's why criticism is at the forefront when you're discussing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It's a game that should be great and take some good steps for the franchise, but it falls incredibly short in performance. Because of that, it can't place any higher than 5 on this list. Number 4, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Team DX. If there's ever been a time to ignore reviews in your lifetime, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon as a series is definitely the reason to do so. Case in point, Explorers of the Sky is absolutely hammered by critics, yet is seen by most to be the best entry into the sub-franchise. The main reason for that will definitely be that word that we keep repeating in repetitiveness. Dungeon crawls can get like that very quickly, especially if you are entering and re-entering the same place multiple times, and if there's no massive upgrade in terms of gameplay from previous entries, that's naturally going to be the opinion. Which I get, of course, and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Team DX falls into that category like most of the franchise, with fan reception definitely being higher than what the reviews have given it. Team DX is actually a remake of the original entries into the franchise of Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team, being one of the first games in a sub-franchise of Pokemon to be remade. The games take the original and provide them with up-to-date graphics and quality of life improvements. This includes things like auto-exploring, new Pokemon introduced in later generations, and Mega Evolutions. It takes a well-loved game already and updates it for the Switch. It's exactly what you want really, and I would go on record to say it's definitely the best game on the Switch. That's not part of the main series of games. Even more impressive is that it managed to beat 2 main series titles to reach 4th on this list. Number 3, Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. Now we can criticize Generation 1 for maybe getting too much love within the franchise. It had a whole card set released about 151 last year, and has had 2 remakes made for it. When you consider Generation 4 didn't even get a fair one, and Generation 5 is still waiting for one. No, that'll probably happen eventually anyways, regardless of whether I say you should want it or not. But the important thing about Generation 1 is that it's safe. Everybody knows it, everybody's familiar with it, and it's a nice and easy game to bring to the forefront. When the Let's Go games came out on the Switch, we didn't actually have a main series game on the console, and that needed to be solved immediately. Riding high on the success of Pokemon Go over the previous few years, they could incorporate a game that used some of the key features via the Switch mechanics, and get a main series game on the console while still working on the next generation. Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu are a great addition to the franchise as they bring Generation 1 to a more accessible point in time. One major issue that Generations 1 to 7 have is transferability to newer games. With the closure of the 3DS and Pokemon Bank, there is a massive issue in terms of transferring Pokemon from older generations to Pokemon Home. Not to mention old games, they're expensive. Again, there's another plug for a video I've done in the past. When they are costing that much money to purchase one of the games, it's no wonder people decide decided to pursue a method that we do not condone. Well, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee brings Generation 1 to a more accessible console in a much simpler format. I think it's a matter of preference whether you prefer Let's Go or Fire Red and Leaf Green. The former is simplified compared to the later, with no wild battles, just catching Pokemon like it's Pokemon Go, and no abilities either. But as remakes go, it was a safe option to take and one that held little risk with a potential high reward. We all know Generation 1 and Game Freak know Generation 1 too. It's not at the top of the list, and that's mostly down to the other options that are available, but it's worth checking out. Number 2, Pokemon Sword and Shield. So I'm going to go on record to say I really like Sword and Shield. Call it the British bias in me because it's based on the UK and has a city in the game that's based on the city I'm from, but I actually think they're good games and great additions to the series. One of the major standout points is the wild area, a large open world zone that allows you to freely explore and encounter Pokemon. It has dynamic weather and changing environments. Gym battles got a major upgrade with them now taking place in a huge stadium, making them feel more important. I thought Dynamaxing was okay as well. It's not the fan favourite in terms of generational gimmicks that have been introduced. And yes, before someone points out, I know that Mega Evolution was in Generation 7, but it's not gone further than that, so it generally has been a gimmick per se. Just like the rest that I've listed here. The DLC expansions are great as well, introducing new forms for the legendary birds. While the absence of the national decks definitely frustrated people, and forever reminded me I can't escape that one decision that the British public made by casually naming it Dexit, I think it's important to focus on what Sword and Shield do well, rather than that particular decision. The game had quite a lot of innovation and improvements on the formula, and was certainly a major step forward in the series, and I don't think the quality of these games should be overshadowed by the absence of certain Pokemon. It's just missed out on top spot, but that's through no fault of its own. Number 1 is just that good. I think Sword and Shield lays some groundwork for future Pokemon games, despite the criticisms that people have given it. And number 1, because of course it is, Pokemon Legends Arceus. Let's be real, it was a foregone conclusion. I think for most involved in the Pokemon franchise as long as I've been, this game shows exactly why we became fans in general. The series has received quite a bit of bashing in recent years, and that's from both fans and critics alike, some of which is definitely justified, some a bit over exaggerated, but Legends Arceus reminds us of why the Pokemon franchise is not only so loved, but can be at the peak of its powers whenever it wants. It was one of the boldest shifts in terms of the franchise, reimagining many core elements while still maintaining the heart of the series. Set in the ancient Hisui region, it transports players back in time where humans and Pokemon were just at the beginnings of understanding each other, offering quite a fresh perspective on the Pokemon world. The game's open world structure was a major departure from the traditional route-based exploration. I'd say its best element is its emphasis on discovery and research. Instead of just trying to beat the gym leaders or trying to catch them all, players are tasked with studying and completing detailed Pokédex entries. By observing them, interacting with them, capturing them, battling them, with you becoming more like a researcher than a trainer. The battle mechanics are a bit tweaked as well, with the ability to do both an agile style and a strong style, each decision changing whether or not you go next in a battle, or your opponent getting 2 turns before yourself. The same which eventually becomes Sinnoh. It's fun and well crafted, plus giving us the abilities to actually get the god of the Pokemon world. A Pokemon that did have an event in Generation 4 cancelled because it was going to be too complicated, because reading Braille was okay, but playing a flute on top of Mount Coronet was very difficult. Only added to the intrigue. We get new Pokemon forms, including for each of the starters, and Pokemon like Stantler. One of its major criticisms was that it wasn't able to live up to the potential of the Switch's hardware, but I honestly think the criticisms for Legends Arceus are a bit more of the minor side. The game's innovation, coupled with its nostalgic yet fresh approach, easily outweigh any drawbacks. Ultimately, I think Pokemon Legends Arceus stands out as the best game on the Switch as it currently stands, and without a doubt it set the bar high for Pokemon Legends ZA in 2025. It's going to be very difficult to live up to that expectation, but another Legends game has definitely got everybody excited, even more so when you consider for the first time in over a decade Pokemon has actually taken a year off from making a main series release, and that's in order to give it enough time to be great. Regardless of that outcome, Legends Arceus has set us on a new path and a new hope for the franchise, something that I hope continues in the future. Thanks for watching everyone. So it's time to throw it over to the comments section. What do you think is the best game on the Nintendo Switch? Was my order right, or would you put a different game higher? I'm curious to hear. Make sure to like and subscribe as it really helps out the channel, and follow me on Twitter for more Pokemon opinions. See you next time, guys.